You're recording for audio, not for video.
Yeah, this will be
All right.
solely audio.
All right. Well, then
Um,
I don't have to worry about how I look. All right, good.
you look fine. You look fine, Representative. You're all good. But State Rep Fine, it is a pleasure to have you here with me today. On behalf of the End Jew Hatred Movement, we consider you a friend, an ally, and someone who is definitely resilient in our shared fight for combating Jew hatred, not just in the state of Florida, but nationwide. And I'm so excited to be here with you today. Representative, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me everything, like your exposure to your first or to the Jewish community that you grew up in, your first experience, going to synagogue. I want to get to know you. I want to be everyone's friend.
Well, sure. So I am Jewish. I would start with that. I'm a Jewish legislator in the state of Florida. Oh, excuse me. I'm the only Republican Jew elected in the Florida state legislature. That doesn't make me special, except the Republican Party controls the Florida government, both chambers with supermajorities, and obviously the governor. And so I'm the only member of the majority party who is Jewish, which puts me in a little bit of a higher profile role. I did not grow up in Florida, though my family's a third generation Florida family. My grandfather came to Florida not long after he got off the boat. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, because my dad was a college professor, and you go where you can get a job. And it wasn't necessarily an easy place for a Jewish kid to grow up. I can say I got to deal with more Jew hatred than a kid should. We did belong to a synagogue, and I was bar mitzvahed. But in Lexington, Kentucky, there weren't that many of us. And so, I was often the only Jewish person in my class or in my grade. And I kind of dealt with a lot because of that. I promised myself when I was a kid that I would never let that happen to my own children. And unfortunately, it is a promise I have not been able to keep. And so I work very hard to try to stop it. I left Kentucky to go to college. I lived in Massachusetts for about 10 years and lived a couple of other places. And then in 2006, settled permanently in Florida, getting elected to the legislature in 2016. And what I'm proud of, among other things, is I really have spearheaded the movement to stop anti-Semitism here in Florida. Again, a mission that we've not entirely succeeded at, but what I am proud of is that we never stop fighting. And even though there aren't that many Jews in my district, ironically, I guess I'm not used to living around a lot of Jews. I didn't grow up with a lot, and I don't have a lot here in South Brevard. I still take my role as kind of a spokesman for the Jewish community very seriously. When you hear the accomplishments of things we've done in Florida over the last 6 or 7 years to protect Jews and to fight anti-Semitism, the vast majority, if not all of those bills, will have my name on them.
Absolutely. And, I've been keeping a track record of it, and I see your passion. So I wanted to pivot over to one specific bill, which is probably like one of my most favorite bills that I've seen pass out of any other legislature around the country, HB 269. I'm familiar with the backstory behind it, but for those who don't know what happened that spearheaded this initiative, I want you to tell me, and for everyone listening, what drew you to HB 269, and
Sure.
how did you get bipartisan support for it? Feel free to tell us the story.
Well, I'd actually take you back to 2019, and not long after, not in 2018, we saw this kind of explosion of anti-Semitism in schools and on university campuses around the country. And so in 2019, I ran a bill to deal with that. And the bill was not that complicated. We put the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism in Florida statute as our definition of anti-Semitism. And then we said that anti-Semitism would be treated on college campuses and in our K through 12 system the same way racism was. What I observed at the time was we discriminated in how we dealt with discrimination. Racism was bad, sexism was bad, all of these other forms of discrimination were bad, But when it came to anti-Semitism, it would be like, well, that's just the Jews. And for some reason, that was the socially acceptable form of discrimination. I think that's why you're doing what you're doing. It continues through today. For some reason, that form of discrimination is okay. And so the innovative approach we took in 2019 was that we said, we aren't going to tell our K through 20 system how to deal with anti-Semitism. We're not going to tell our university systems how to deal with anti-Semitism. We're just going to say you have to deal with it the same way you deal with racism. So however you would treat the Ku Klux Klan, if they show up on campus, that will be how you would treat a BDS organization if they show up on campus. However you would treat a student who got told, go back to Africa, you would tell a student who you said, go back to Israel. And that really made a profound difference. We do not have the level of anti-Semitism on our college campuses in this state that you find in other places around the country. For example, a speaker like we saw in the universities that we've seen these commencement speakers, they would be expelled in the state of Florida. Because again, if you stood up at a college campus in New York and you said, and you used the N-word, I would certainly hope you'd be expelled. And so however you would be treated for using the N-word, you'd be treated for anti-Semitism. And interestingly, what we learned is people were worried there would be lawsuits about the bill, but people were so concerned that any lawsuit, if it was successful, might eliminate protections against racism that no one has sued. And so that law has been in place for a number of years. Was the first bill in the history of the state of Florida signed outside of the state. It was actually signed in Israel in 2019. So fast forward to today. Well, while we kind of nipped the problem in the bud, largely in our education system, we've seen over the last few years this dramatic increase in anti-Semitic incidents, not only I think around the country, but here in Florida. And what I noticed was the frequency had increased. What used to happen once a year started to happen once a month, and then once a week, and then also almost every day. Just this incredible frequency. The second thing was the intensity and the hatefulness of it. And the third thing, and the thing that bothered me the most, was the lack of anonymity. So, the Ku Klux Klan, they wore those little pillowcases over their head for a reason. And it was, they didn't want people to know who they were. Deep down, they knew what they were doing was wrong. And so they didn't want people to know. But what you find now with the modern day Nazis, they don't mind. They take videos of themselves and they put it on social media. And that's very, very disturbing. They're proud of this. And what we saw here in Florida is that they were pushing the envelope, moving from speech into behavior. Look, you have the right to stand across the street from my house and on the sidewalk and wave a sign saying, put Randy Fine in the ovens. But you don't have the right to come onto my property and say that. You don't have the right to graffiti that on my home. You don't have the right to attack me physically. And so what we did this year is we passed a bill that focused on action, on conduct that some of these groups were doing that was not about speech, but it was about behavior. It was about intimidating and scaring people. And we said, look, if you want to pass out a flyer in a public park, hand it to someone saying Jews should be killed, you have the right to do that. It's called the First Amendment. But you don't have the right to throw that flyer onto somebody's property. That's littering. It's a crime. Well, now that's a third-degree felony and gets you sent to prison for 5 years in the state of Florida. You can project whatever you want on your own house or on your own building. But if you project a swastika onto mine, you're defacing my property. That's graffiti. And you're going to go to prison for 5 years. And if you attack someone because they're wearing a kippah, or frankly, a burqa, if they're Muslim, you're going to go to prison for 5 years. And so we looked at these areas of conduct that these hate groups were using, and we focused on them while recognizing they did have the ability that free speech is sacrosanct in this country. But what's interesting is these groups aren't really interested in speech. They're interested in scaring people. And we learned this. This bill went through the legislature. It passed unanimously off both floors, and almost every member of the legislature co-sponsored the bill. But interestingly, the bill, I believe, went through 5 committees in the Florida legislature. And in Florida, anyone can speak about a bill in committee. We have public comment. And these same Nazis that were so interested in scaring old people, in scaring children, in screaming at rabbis, guess how many of them came and availed themselves of the public comment to talk about how terrible Jews are? None, not a single one. Which proved, and by the way, that was with me goading them. I pointed it out in every hearing. So what proved is they aren't interested in speech. They're interested in action. And in the state of Florida, we're going to protect your right to free speech. But if you want to engage in hateful actions, you're going to go to prison.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you brought up like commencement speakers. You know, one thing that the End Jew Hatred movement is doing this week is we're going to be leading a protest outside the City University, New York chancellor's office, basically calling for the resignation of Dean Setti for embracing Fatima Mohammed's anti-Semitic commencement speech. And, you know, you literally said, you know, if someone were to make a speech similar to that in Florida, they would have been expelled on the fly. Do you think New York should adopt some kind of legislation similar to what is going on through HB 269 and other bits of legislation to basically penalize this type of behavior?
They should, but the fact of the matter is they are anti-Semites. So they're not going to do it. I mean, in Florida, we found that the people running our universities, they're not anti-Semites. They just didn't really know what to do. But anyone who embraces that speaker, they hate Jews. And right. So you've got a much bigger problem. But the fact of the matter is all those Jews are leaving New York and they're coming here because they know in Florida that we will protect them.
So something interesting that I saw over the weekend, which really raised a lot of questions because, you know, this is something that, you know, I personally believe that Governor DeSantis would never endorse. I know he signed HB 269 into law, and that was fantastic and even more symbolic that the governor did this in Jerusalem. Over the weekend, I guess there were some neo-Nazi rallies that were going on in front of Disney World or Disneyland. And I saw in one of the pictures that one of the neo-Nazi protesters was holding a sign that said DeSantis 2024, which to me doesn't make any sense because he signed your bill taking a firm stance against white supremacy. So my question is, what could be done to better raise awareness of this bill, the passage of this bill, to ensure that white supremacists don't find political refuge in any political party? And do you think maybe this guy who was carrying the flag knew that DeSantis didn't like him and his ideology and his hate-filled rhetoric and was applying some kind of Lincoln Project-esque tactic similar to what was done to Governor Glenn Youngkin on the campaign trail? If you're familiar with that particular incident, do you think it could be something along the lines of this? You know, because sometimes neo-Nazis tend to have certain tactics that they do, you know, like the Ormond Beach rally that happened very, very recently with the National Socialist Movement and the Goyim Defense League. They ended up not showing up. And it was also part of the reason behind that was because their permit was revoked. They probably knew that the sheriff, who has been outspoken against anti-Semites and hate groups, they probably knew that they were going to have their permit revoked. Do you think they tried to use this as a tactical means to make some kind of argument for the First Amendment? I wanted to get your thoughts on all that.
Well, I mean, I've seen some of the video from Orlando. My understanding is it's 24 people. Interestingly, my understanding is they wore masks. And the Goyim Defense League and many of these other groups, we talked about how proud they are to do this and show their faces. So you're calling them neo-Nazis. I'm going to call them people. And the reason I'm going to do that is I don't know who they are. I don't know that they actually believe the stuff that they were saying. You know, I could put on a mask and say just about anything to try to cause trouble. Now, I'm not going to go to the extent and say, oh, it was a false flag or anything else. But you don't know what's in the minds of those people. You don't know that they aren't trying to embarrass Governor DeSantis. You don't know who these people are. I will say this. they have, I mean, as far as I can tell, they didn't break any laws. You have the right to wave a sign that says kill all the Jews. That's America. I don't agree with it. And by the way, if you do that in front of my house, I'll probably be the one that goes to jail because I'll come and kick your ass. But you know, and by the way, I've said that to those people. Come and wave that sign across the street. It's legal, but you're going to end up being carried away. And so I don't know what these people, who these people are. I don't know what they are or what they're doing. But as far as I know, they didn't break the law. And what we have to acknowledge is people have the right in America to do that sort of thing. And I also don't know that how much attention we should give them. I think that is part of the governor's thinking is every time some idiot walks around with a swastika, does he have to call a press conference about it? Or should we just ignore them? And so we have done what we can do. And if they come up with more actions that we can prosecute and that we can come up with laws against, we will do that. But waving a flag, standing on a sidewalk, waving a sign, it's not against the law.
Gotcha. It's really, really interesting. You know, over the past couple of weeks, I've heard a lot of debate surrounding HB 269, like even reaching notable conservative influencers and pundits. You know, you got like Dave Rubin arguing with, what's his name? Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah, that guy's an idiot, though. He's clearly an idiot. So
I know.
Not Rubin, it's Vivek. You know, he knows about as much about anti-Semitism as he does inventing Alzheimer's drugs, which is very little.
Sadly, I'm not related to Dave, but he's a really good guy. And
yeah, I wasn't talking about him. I was talking about the other guy.
Yeah. And, you know, I appreciated Dave's advocacy towards this bill and his passionate defense. And it even reached, you know, Meghan McCain's husband, you know, saying the same thing. It doesn't give you the right to come onto my lawn and express your hate. You know, it's just common sense. It's not an infringement on free speech. So did you get any pushback? I know you said the bill was supported overwhelmingly, but within the legislature, did you get any sort of pushback from any political party citing the First Amendment or free speech issues?
Yeah, I mean, we did on both sides, to be frank. There were some Democrats who voted against the bill in committee because to them, you know, if the bill didn't address every problem in the world, it shouldn't have been voted for. Interestingly, you know, when they put forward a bill to deal with, you know, other forms of discrimination, they never feel the need to include the Jews, but somehow a bill about the Jews needs to include everybody else. And so there was some pushback on that. There was some pushback of, is this really that big of a deal? Mm-hmm. And I'll explain why we get some of that. And then there was some pushback. The original version of the bill had some sloppy drafting in it that we needed to fix, and that's the purpose of the legislative process to get this put up. So we did have some pushback, and you know, one of the things that concerns me as someone who doesn't know how much time I'm going to have left in the legislature, I don't like to claim credit for things that I didn't do, but I know in my heart that most of these anti-Semitism bills wouldn't have happened if I wasn't there. And so those things do concern me. So, but you know, I'm very proud of the fact that we've thought through these things and we've come up with bills that will work. And you know, unfortunately, you've got people out there that don't understand. You know, this Vivek idiot, he made a comment that says free speech is absolute. I guess then I should be able to call him up and say, I'm going to come to your house and kill you. Because free speech is absolute. And I think you have people who just don't think about what they say. If it's absolute, you should be able to yell fire in a crowded theater because free speech is absolute. So once we realize that there's not a single person in the United States that believes that free speech is absolute, including this Vivek guy, whoever he is, then it's a question of where do we put those guardrails?
Absolutely. I mean, even going back to City University of New York, I mean, we know the limitations of free speech and when it is and isn't appropriate, especially just invoking politics in general in a commencement speech, even for law
Sure.
schools. You
And,
just
and
want to
here's and
hear,
here's why
yeah,
that's okay. It's sort of like our BDS law that we passed. No one has the right to a contract with government, right?
hmm
No one has the right to give a speech at a graduation ceremony. Because if you have that right, then anyone who wants can, in order for it to be a right, anyone has to be able to do it. There's a reason you can go and scream and yell on a street corner if you want. You know why? Because anyone can go and stand and yell on a street corner. But if only one person gets to give that graduation speech, then they have no right to give it. And as a result, there is the ability to have some say over what is said.
absolutely. Um, there was one more question that I had for you that is going to come to me in just a second. Oh, I remember now. So, part of the End Jew Hatred movement involves giving credit to everybody, no matter which side of the aisle they belong to, crediting the success stories of leadership. And, you said, everyone in the legislature voted for it overwhelmingly. There was a little bit of hiccups in between like certain committees, but eventually it managed to go through, and it's something that's overwhelmingly supported. And it really could not have been done without your leadership. So do you think in the fight against anti-Semitism, the healthiest way that advocates, allies, mobilizers, really just the Jewish community at large should approach the battle against our shared issue should be to give credit when credit is due, whether it's under Republican or Democrat leadership?
Yeah, and I would say this, in the case of our bill,
Mm-hmm.
everybody supported it, and so that deserves credit to both Republicans and Democrats. But the flip side is true. Neither party has a monopoly on anti-Semites. The Democratic Party,
Amen.
the Democratic Party certainly has them. They serve in Congress. But the Republican Party has them too, and unfortunately there are few bipartisan issues in this world, but on the fringe of both sides, hating Jews is one of them. And so I think what we have to say, I never say, oh, there's anti-Semitism, that's the Democrats' fault, because there are Democrats that are anti-Semitic, but the vast majority aren't. And there are Republicans who are anti-Semitic, and the vast majority of them aren't. But I will tell
That's
you
correct.
what I think the thing that we have to do is we have to understand why people don't always take anti-Semitism seriously. And I think I've figured it out. It's because I'll tell you about a conversation I had with my colleagues. I told them about what was going on, one colleague in particular, this is years ago. And he looked at me, and he's not anti-Semitic. He looked at me and he goes, no one can actually believe this. So everybody sort of understands why racism exists. Everybody sort of gets it, right? Everybody sort of understands why sexism exists. People sort of get it. But most people who aren't anti-Semites don't understand anti-Semitism because they're not anti-Semites, and they go, who thinks this stuff? Like they're incredulous that people have these views, and that's a good problem. But the problem is that when they are incredulous that people have these views, they go, no, this can't be real, because no one could actually believe this, and they have a hard time accepting there are people in this world that are that stupid that they do. And I think that is the biggest challenge we have in fighting anti-Semitism, is making the vast majority of the country who are not anti-Semites, make them understand what anti-Semitism is and that it exists. It's a good problem because they don't get it. They don't understand, why would someone hate Jews? Because most people are Christian, and we're Jews and Christians aren't that different. There's one big difference, but other than that, it's there's a lot of similarities, and so they just don't get it. And so I think that's what we have to do, is make them understand, because it just doesn't come as naturally as some of these other forms of bigotry.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask one last question since I know
Sure.
you're probably short on time, and this is something that like circulated the news recently. I'm not sure if you've commented on it, but the Biden plan to combat anti-Semitism. Our position in the End Jew Hatred movement is that there are a lot of good elements to it. One in particular being a research center within the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. I mean, you create jobs, you create opportunities, an avenue for research. I fully support that. But, it doesn't make sense to include a leading purveyor of Jew hatred, in this case, CARE, to be part of the plan. And it is something that we feel is deeply problematic. As a matter of fact, CARE openly defended Fatima Mohammed at City University of New York. Right now, City University of New York, I mean, that school alone is the Biden administration's ultimate litmus test in regards to applying this strategy. So I wanted to get your honest thoughts on it, what you think could be done to better enhance it. Just wanted to see how you feel about it.
Well, when I found out that CARE was involved, I stopped paying attention because that's a disqualifying event. I've had to deal with them for years here in Florida because they have a fairly active presence here. And they, interestingly, the last time things really flared up a year or two ago between Israel and the the Muslims who live in Judea and Samaria, they really went out of their way to target people like me and to try to get us to shut up and called us a bunch of names. And so the notion that Biden would allow CARE to be involved means he's not serious about fighting anti-Semitism. And so I think, it's the fruit from what they call the fruit from the poisonous tree. If you let them be part of the conversation, they're part of the problem. And so it means it's window dressing. It's not serious, and I think people should look at it that way. I just think they gave up the moral high ground, and to me, it's all crap once he let them be involved.
Totally agree. I mean, it really does not make any sense. I mean,
Would you?
genuinely.
Yeah, if you were going to deal with, if you were going to deal with people who, I don't know. I'm just trying. If you were going to deal with racism, would you invite the Ku Klux Klan? Does still exist apparently. If you were going to deal with the racism, would you invite the Ku Klux Klan to participate in how to do it? I don't think you would. And so it's what these people were thinking. I don't know. Other than they just wanted to. They didn't want to. Look, I'm willing to fight the people in my party who hate Jews. My issue with the Democratic Party, to be blunt, is they aren't. And you can see that when Biden invites CARE. You can see that by the way they treat Rashid Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. They're willing to tolerate it.
Tlaib is actually in my neighboring district out here in Metro Detroit.
And when there have been Republicans in Congress who have been anti-Semitic, you have seen the Republican Party take them on and try to throw them out. You do not. The Democratic Party seems very willing to tolerate anti-Semitism. Even though most of them aren't anti-Semitic, they seem willing to tolerate it. I think there's no better example of that than inviting CARE to be a part of the conversation about how to deal with anti-Semitism, a group that actually wants more anti-Semitism. So I don't get it.
Yeah, it really is ridiculous, but I genuinely appreciate the conversation we had today, Representative Fine. As I reiterated before, you are a friend of our movement. We love all the work you do, and you're part of the success story that brings energy into this movement, much needed energy. And I am so thankful that we got to connect today and that we had this conversation. In the meantime, feel free to reach out to the End Jew Hatred movement. Visit us at endjewhatred.com. There's room for people to start their own chapters, to be engaged, to learn what's going on the ground. Representative Fine, thank you so much for everything.
You're welcome. And I do it for all